movies. Magical projections of millions of pictures that can inspire awe or terror. And today on Goji Center, we're wrenching two of the most famous beasts of the sea right out of film to plop them in front of each other and battle for dominance of the seas. For this totally serious event, we are pitting a most wondrous whale against one of the most sinister sharks to find out whose comatose franchise is getting revived next. In today's special edition of Monster Face-Off, we present a duel of franchises. Free Willy versus Jaws. No, seriously, we're totally doing this. First things first, let's set up some ground rules. If this was solely using the first outings of both franchises, this would be an absolute squash match. We're talking about an emaciated young orca held in a tiny tank versus a great white so big that Hooper mistook it for a young megalodon in the novel. For about 5 seconds before Quint basically called him an idiot. But for anybody less in the know, since these movies came out before most of you were born, there were multiple sequels to Free Willy and Jaws. 2 direct sequels, and a reboot starring the daughter of Steve Irwin. Because the first 2 sequels are involving the same whale years later, we'll be using that as well. This is canon. The shark from Jaws, popularly called Bruce after Steven Spielberg's lawyer, seemingly died at the end of their movie when Police Chief Brody broke physics and somehow caused an air tank to explode like dynamite. But various statements about the sharks from the video game Jaws Unleashed and Jaws the Game have them as either alternate versions of the same shark or just flat out the same shark. Somehow. And because all statements are totally 100% true, and we should use them even in contradiction to other evidence, this is canon. And to round it out, we'll be using aspects of the sharks from the second and fourth movie. In the totally canon novelizations, yes, those are a thing, the novels for the second and fourth movie establish a clear lineage, with the second and fourth sharks being the mate and child of Bruce. This brings some interesting X factors involved, but we'll get to those later. We're not using the third movie's shark from Jaws 3D, both because that shark was absurdly huge even by Jaws movie standards, 35 plus feet versus Bruce's almost 25, and because this franchise introduced something much older than a lot of people would think, with the fourth movie completely retconning the events of Jaws 3D. Meaning those hilarious 3D effects are no longer canonically trying to poke someone's eye out. There is more material we will be noting later, but let's get started with this completely legit face-off. Section 1, Corporal Build. Jaws, aka Bruce, and the freest of Willies are not supposedly, keyword supposedly, fantasy monsters. The original intent of both franchises' first outing is that both of them are 2 completely standard Carcharodon Carcharius and Orcinus Orca. Willy was a young orca held in abusive captive conditions, portrayed by an actual orca held in abusive captive conditions. While the other movies thankfully only needed use of an animatronic for the effects, the first movie did use a real whale for a lot of shots. So we can be reasonably certain Willy was roughly the same size as the orca portraying them. Named Keiko, this orca was severely malnourished and small at only about 3,000 kilograms. Thankfully, Keiko did get better accommodations and was eventually nursed back to better health, growing to about 7.3 meters long and 5,200 kilograms. And given that Willy also was living in better conditions in the wild in his later adventures, we can be reasonably certain he wound up a similar size. He certainly got a happier ending than his actor. Pro tip, kids, don't look it up unless you want a sad day. So it is likely Willy got even larger, but we'll play it safe. Jaws, meanwhile, has several sizes, depending on which source you use. But the most consistent one puts the shark in the original movie and its nearly identical offspring in the fourth movie at about 7.6 meters or 25 feet long. This is already considered bigger than the most reliably measured great whites and makes previous channel guest star Deep Blue look like small fry. Using volumetric scaling from known sharks, a great white roughly the size of Amity Island's scourge would be somewhere around 5,000 to 5,500 kg. So, we essentially have a fairly average-sized male orca against a great white the size of an orca. Whilst the female sharks of the second and third movie are larger, we're chiefly using Bruce and his progeny from the fourth outing for this comparison. This puts the physical size contest between the two at nearly dead even. This category stands at a draw. Section 2, Mobility. Due to the nature of this kind of fight we're analyzing and the kinds of animals involved, we'll be combining speed and stamina together for this one. The true top speed of the two apex predators of the modern ocean is still a bit of an open question. So, the great white shark is the largest member of the mackerel shark family, scientifically called Lemnidae, which also includes speed demons like the mako shark. Unlike most other sharks, Lemnidae sharks have special blood vessels that keep their swimming muscles warm, allowing them to maintain higher body temperatures for better speed and endurance than most fish. Size-wise, though, Jaws the Elder and the Junior would be slowed down somewhat by their larger size, increasing drag and water resistance, but they still can reach respectable speeds. Willy certainly was in far better health in the later movies than in his first outing. Orca are the largest of the dolphins and are practically equally as adept at rapid movement underwater as their smaller cousins. The contest between sharks and toothed whales has been a long one, but a key reason why these mammals have managed to seriously compete with sharks, despite the predatory fish having hundreds of millions of years of a head start in the ocean, comes down to one thing: oxygen. Water obviously has oxygen in it, so does air. However, despite water being a denser material, it is harder to get as much oxygen out of it as breathing air. Most larger sharks, like great whites, employ what is called ram breathing, where the water is filtered over the gills by force due to the shark constantly swimming forward with its mouth and/or gills open. Water goes over the gills get out the oxygen. This method helps constantly add oxygen in, but it does so at a trickle. That's why when some species of sharks stop moving or get toppled into an odd position long enough, they might actually suffocate. Breathing air and using mammalian lungs does mean that an orca can't constantly take on oxygen as it's swimming around, but the air tank it has is more than enough to turbocharge the body. Oxygen is a lot easier to get out of the air than it is in the water, and marine mammals like Willy have special adaptations to store even more oxygen in the bloodstream and organs long before they need to take another breath. And with a top speed comparable to a large shark, this means Willy would be capable of faster movement for longer periods of time and in quicker explosive bursts than the shark. Edge, Willy.
YouTube Premium is ad-free YouTube and background play. So you...
Section 3, Armor. Orca, as the largest dolphins to ever exist, have skin similar to their smaller cousins. The outermost layer of skin, the epidermis, is reasonably strong by mammal standards, but isn't especially thick. What gives them the most protection, however, is the underlying layers, like the dermis and blubber, that act like padding on top of the muscle. These structures add a significant amount of weight to the animal and function chiefly for thermal regulation. Still, at up to 10 centimeters thick in some select regions, it does perform well at cushioning the bludgeoning impact and reducing the effect of piercing teeth to some degree. But on the other hand, shark skin virtually needs no introduction, especially after the overview of this exact same species we gave when Deep Blue found herself in the fight of her life against a time-traveling dunk in a previous face-off. But to give the cliff notes, great white shark skin is covered in heavily modified teeth called dermal denticles, like with most sharks. These are chiefly for blocking parasites and making the shark more hydrodynamic in the water, but they do help add extra defense all the same. What protects a shark the most, however, is the extremely tough underlying layers of skin. Sometimes overestimated on the internet, research shows these layers tend to be around 3 centimeters thick. Since Bruce and his son are both male great whites, their skin wouldn't be as thick proportionally as a large female would be, but it still proved plenty resilient against anything but large piercing weapons. So who wins the edge? Willy has thicker armor in several regions, but a deciding factor is how well each of their armor does against the opponent's weapons. The conical teeth of an orca are great at crushing and gripping, but some of their penetrating power will be dampened by the stiffer, scaled hide of the shark. Great whites, meanwhile, specifically evolved to hunt marine mammals and are used to sawing through blubber. Both are fully capable of hurting the other with their primary weapons, but the shark's defenses give it just a bit more extra protection when talking on a purely physical basis. Whether or not the shark's hide will be pierced by a superior weapon than just teeth remains to be seen. For now, the edge in this category goes to Jaws. Section 4, Bite Effectiveness. Orca and great whites do have broadly similar diets, but go about tearing up their prey very differently. What you're looking at is a tooth of an orca and a tooth of the great white shark. Orca have conical teeth that seize and crush, refusing to let go as the dolphin thrashes around. This basically weaponizes the water resistance to dismember prey. If the orca thrashes upwards, for example, when something is in its mouth, the water pressure on the rest of the target's body pushes it down. This keeps happening until eventually the flesh the dolphin is biting into gives way and is twisted out. But how much power are we talking about? The true total force of an orca's jaws is still hard to pin down, contrary to some questionable claims on the internet of it being over 60,000 newtons. Still, they have been recorded breaking thick bones on other marine mammals that would have required substantial force to crunch through. So, a chomping pressure somewhere north of 18,000 newtons is very likely. For Jaws? Despite the movie poster famously using a mako shark for the grisly grill of the antagonist of Jaws, which you can tell from looking at the long pointed teeth on the poster, the attributes of the movie sharks are fairly true to life for a great white, at least as far as a half-functioning animatronic that tried to eat George Lucas can get. Great white teeth are heavily serrated on both sides and largely symmetrical, unlike most other types of sharks. After being grabbed by these fangs, smaller targets might be cut in half and swallowed up. Bigger targets are usually grabbed and thrashed against, which works the serrations back and forth into the flesh like a series of saws. A shark the size of Jaws having a crunching force somewhere around 15,000 to 16,000 newtons is entirely possible. This might be somewhat less than a more mature Willy, but the differences in the teeth help make up for the gap. The whale is a crusher who uses the water around them to tear out chunks and dismember. This shark is a shredder, sawing through tissue to cause massive lacerations. Willy's bite would cause the most damage if he targeted the shark's fins or gills, whereas the shark would be able to sort through the blubber and padding all over Willy's body. And if given the opportunity to crunch long enough, this could be fatal. To be fair, both methods can be lethal, but one is more easy to inflict greater damage when tooth makes contact with the opponent. Jaws takes a decisive advantage with their bite. Section 5, X Factor. Longtime viewers of the channel might be a bit confused why this section is showing up earlier than usual, since this is usually the last category. But before we proceed with the next categories, we thought we needed to discuss X Factor first. If we are going on all of the inclusive stories of the two sagas, there is a very important difference to make between a matchup of these two awesome oceanics and their real-life counterparts. And since we're being totally legitimately serious and including the video games into this, we have the confusing quandary of the Bruce spontaneously regenerating after being blown up by Chief Brody, and we may have just found out how this is possible. So, in the novelization of the fourth movie, because yes, that is a thing, we get a hint at why these sharks seem supernatural. Why do they keep going after the Brody family? Why does each shark seem to have the same personality and drive of the other ones? How did one stalk Brody's widow across most of a continent to the Bahamas before trying to take a bite out of Alfred from Batman? How can this make any sense? Why is this a thing? If your answer was, well, a wizard did it, you're actually right. Voodoo, or rather Vodou in the real world, is a series of folk beliefs and religious practices. West Africa captives wrenched away from their homes under the brutal conditions in the New World, mixing native beliefs with Catholicism. In crazy Hollywood land, it basically means politically incorrect warlocks are a thing and exist in the Jaws universe. Why are these sharks so ravenous for human flesh, despite ample studies showing sharks do not become habitual man-eaters like some other predators? Magic. How is it that same shark from Jaws seems to just continuously keep reincarnating and acting the exact same way every time? Magic! How is it that when they're angry enough, despite sharks lacking any vocal structures whatsoever, they roar like Jerry the Mouse? Because a mostly off-screen wizard had some beef with the Brody family and was basically off-screen playing Jaws Unleashed this whole time, piloting the sharks. This was never confirmed to be the case in the video game, but it certainly does explain a few things. And because we're being completely serious and thorough, this is canon. It also raises serious questions as to if the sharks can ever permanently die, or will their supernatural condition just transpose itself onto another shark of the same bloodline? Or if the video games really are correct and somehow Bruce pulled himself back together after exploding. So, how is Willy supposed to stand up to the forces of such sorcery? After all, this was just a series about a boy helping his captive friend highlight the problems of orca in marine parks a decade before Blackfish came out.
Well, I feel so useless.
Yep, magic. In Free Willy, the animated series set between the events of the movies, our protagonist Jesse and his orca friend were gifted magical powers so they could communicate and talk to each other to learn valuable lessons about friendship. And also fight an evil cyborg going around the world causing problems in his sci-fi submarine. Along the way, they had such adventures as confronting pollution monsters and fighting a very biologically implausible hybrid giant squid that seems like it should have come out of the Hall of Shame. Yeah, when you heard about this series being the magic of the 90s, you didn't think it was being literal, did you? Neither did we. So now that we established that there are some supernatural phenomena and wizardry at play, let's proceed with the remaining typical and atypical categories. Section 6. Intelligence. Normal great white sharks are capable of recognizing potential prey and threats from experience, possibly even hunting in groups to a limited capacity and showing much more advanced cognition than most fish. In Crazy Country, meanwhile, these magical sharks are capable of holding grudges, identifying specific targets based on their family lineage, tracking people over hundreds of kilometers even when they're in a plane somehow, and figuring out how to escape traps and hazards like confinement in a marine park when someone playing a PlayStation game is controlling them. Orca are famously some of the most intelligent predators on the planet, with individual pods led by a matriarch with decades of experience and insight. Individual orca pods are capable of specific hunting techniques, depending on what prey is most available to them in their region, such as learning to flip over sharks to induce immobility and make them easier to kill. Willy has also shown complex memory and intelligence, like figuring out how to get around hazards to inspire the poster of the first movie, disabling whaling ships without causing serious harm to himself, and choosing to spare a whaler at the behest of his human friend, who also probably was trying to make sure the third movie didn't shoot up in raining. In the animated series, he uses tools and combative strategy, and he talks, and sounds like a nasally version of Leon from Resident Evil 2. Unless Jaws somehow ends up with a musical at one point, with the shark getting a solo singing number to go with the roaring, the whale takes this one. Section 7. Physicality. Both combatants have survived attacks from substantially larger opponents, crashing through stone formations, shattering reinforced glass, bites from other marine predators, and underwater explosions going off next to them. And considering that the shock waves of explosions are much more powerful underwater than in the air, this is especially noteworthy. So in terms of general resistance to blunt impacts, the two are comparable. But what about what they can take in addition to what they can dish out? Willy, reboots aside, is still just one orca and has been threatened with being taken out of the picture by sufficient force before. Jaws, as a collective, meanwhile, is functionally immortal. If one shark dies, it seems that the dark magic driving them just manifests in another shark, potentially of the same bloodline. That, or if we take the games completely seriously, apparently they can pull themselves back together after exploding. Maybe if we really are mixing voodoo and video games together, extra lives are just a thing that exists. Useful, considering the Jaws sharks seem to have an odd tendency to explode even when they really shouldn't. Bruce the Elder detonated from an air tank getting punctured in his mouth, which several tests, including one done by the Mythbusters, showed an air tank getting punctured would turn into a projectile instead of exploding. His son in the fourth movie, meanwhile, exploded upon being impaled on the bow of a ship for seemingly no reason. Well, got a terrible case of the explosions? Those extra lives might come in handy. Remember, all of this is canon. The shark gets the uncanny edge here. We are now ready to reveal which of these two will swim out of this situation alive and well. The shark has an edge in overall bite effectiveness and physicality, given they seemingly can respawn. Willy, meanwhile, takes a very important edge in underwater mobility and intelligence. These two are dead even in strength and nonsensical X factors. Coming up, Jaws versus Willy. Time to see which franchise is being put underwater next.
anyways, like, that's, I don't know, I love that video. Oh my god, is that a shark? Oh my god!
Free Willy swims free once more, and apparently saved a surviving Riot clone who escaped Goji HQ. But those two struggle may not be over yet. Physicality-wise, Willy and Jaws were very comparable, if we're going into complete Looney Land and compositing both of them. Both of them have done things no shark or orca has any business doing when the supernatural is totally seriously factored. Both of them have been hurt by damage the other could have inflicted, so the deciding factor was mind versus muscle. The whale was smart enough to try and use different tactics to his advantage, and with the shark having an odd tendency to, explode, it's quite possible Willy would have unwittingly caused such an event. But you know that thing they say about cash cow franchises. They never stay dead forever. Willy might have been capable of leveraging his intelligence to defeat Jaws, but unless the whale can counter the inexplicable magic curse, the shark might wind up pulling itself back together time and time again. Just like its franchise inevitably will when Universal eventually reboots it.